This is the new Chevy Blazer, and it's a huge mistake. The off-roader SUV segment is huge right now. The Toyota 4Runner and Jeep Wrangler are selling in record numbers. Ford brought back the Bronco as a cool off-roader SUV. Land Rover brought back the Defender as a cool off-roader SUV. Chevy brought back the Blazer and gave us this. Yet another boring crossover. They totally missed the trend, and today I'm going to review the new Blazer and explain why it's such a disappointment. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era, now with free listings. You can list your car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And we've had some great sales recently, including this Ram TRX, which brought over $90,000, this fantastic Roush Ford F-150, which sold for $45,000, and this wonderful old school Chevy Silverado, which brought more than $17,000 in great condition. If you're looking to sell your cool enthusiast car or truck, sell it with Cars and Bids. We have a great selection and daily auctions on carsandbids.com. So let's talk Blazer. Now, like I said, the off-roader SUV segment has been huge lately. The Toyota 4Runner is setting all-time sales records, even though it's an ancient vehicle. The Jeep Wrangler is more popular than ever, and there's now a pickup truck version, and a V8 version, and an electric version. The new Ford Bronco has been revived to great fanfare, and the Land Rover Defender has also made a comeback, and both have long waiting lists. So Chevy saw this happening, and they also decided to revive a historic SUV name, the Blazer. But instead of cashing in on this major growing segment off-roaders, Chevy decided to give us another crossover. They already had 4 crossovers. They brought back the Blazer name and they said, "Dad, let's skip the off-roader thing and just make it a 5th crossover." And it's so disappointing. And today I'm going to review the Blazer and show you around this missed opportunity. First, I'll show you a few of its quirks and features, then I'll get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a Doug's score. All right, time for a few quirks and features of the new Blazer. And one of the interesting things about this vehicle is, even though they revived the Blazer name and this is a crossover, they intended to make this kind of like a Camaro SUV. And that's immediately evident when you get inside and look at this interior. In fact, Camaro owners who have never been in a Blazer will look at this and say, wait, that's my interior. And aside from the steering wheel, it pretty much is. This whole dashboard has been lifted almost straight out of a Camaro, and it shares a lot more parts and design with the Camaro than any other Chevy crossover. There's a lot of Camaro in here, including some Camaro specific touches, like the incredibly clever way you adjust the climate control temperature by twisting the outside of the climate vent left or right, and that changes the temperature. A very cool feature on the Camaro brought into the Blazer and no other Chevy models. You also have this row of buttons above the climate vents that's straight out of the Camaro as well, as is this cool display for changing the fan speed. You tap these buttons up or down, and then little lights light up in this tiny screen in the center to tell you what the fan speed is. But that's getting too specific, because the overall look of this interior, like I said, far more Camaro, a low slung dashboard, a smaller hexagon screen, all of that comes straight out of the Camaro in the Blazer. And this continues on the outside, where it's very clear the intent was to mimic the look of the Camaro, but in an SUV. You have a very upright A-pillar, as you can see by the windshield, but then around back, this hip line kind of curves up to the back of the car, just like it does in the Camaro. In fact, take a look at the roofline of the Camaro next to the roofline of the Blazer, and you can see this is where they got their inspiration. This crease kind of coming up and pinching the rear window on the side from the bottom, very Camaro-esque. And then there's the front end, which is pretty much the same story. You can see clearly borrowed from the Camaro up here too. Same exact grille shape, same little narrow headlights. It really does look like the front end was just pulled off a Camaro and turned into SUV form for the Blazer. And annoyingly, that means the Blazer also has probably the very worst trait of the modern Camaro, and that would be visibility. The Camaro has been almost universally criticized for its tiny windows and make it hard to see out of, and since they made the Blazer look like the Camaro, it too has relatively tiny windows and that really tiny back window thanks to that Camaro-inspired line on the side. So visibility, a bit of a disappointment since it seems they were trying to create a Camaro SUV. But the real problem with the Camaro comparisons comes under the hood. Despite Camaro styling and the drawbacks of Camaro visibility, many Blazer models come with the turbo 4-cylinder and makes only 230 horsepower. This one has the very best Blazer engine, which is a V6 with about 300 horsepower. Not exactly Camaro territory, despite all of the Camaro styling cues. So the new Blazer looks like a Camaro, but it doesn't perform like one. And the new Blazer is called the Blazer, but frankly, it doesn't perform like one of those either. The Blazer came to popularity in the 1970s as a cool, burly off-roader SUV, and right now, the nostalgia factor is huge. It is not uncommon to see 70s Blazers trading hands for up to $100,000 or more. Now, Ford recognized this trend and this sweeping nostalgia for old-school off-roaders, and they came out with the new Bronco, and they brought it back as a cool new off-roader to mimic the best years of the old one. Chevy brought back the Blazer to look like a Camaro, even though it doesn't perform like one, and to be called the Blazer, even though it doesn't have the cachet of one of those either. And that's a huge shame, because there is clearly a market for these off-roader SUVs like the new Blazer could have been. Last year, Chevy sold 94,000 new Blazers, which is pretty good, but that was in its first full year on the market. The same year, Jeep sold 200,000 new Wranglers, and that's in its third full year on the market, and that doesn't even count the Gladiator, which sold another 77,000 units. Toyota managed to sell almost 130,000 4Runners with a vastly higher sticker price, and the current 4Runner came out in 2010. So an 11-year-old vehicle is outselling this brand new Blazer at a higher price point. The off-roader market is there. The new Ford Bronco has debuted to great fanfare and excitement and waiting lists, and that's also true in the higher end space. The Land Rover Defender and the new Mercedes G-Wagon, both in incredibly high demand. So Chevy sees all of this success of all of these off-roaders, and instead they give us yet another crossover. And frankly, probably a decent portion of new Blazer sales have gone to rental fleets, which isn't true of any of the other vehicles I've named, except for maybe a little bit of Jeep Wrangler. And amazingly, this is a trend with General Motors. They've been amazingly conservative about entering the off-roader market. Incredibly conservative, frankly, embarrassingly conservative. I've already talked about SUVs. How about trucks? The Ford Raptor came out for the 2010 model year, and General Motors pretty confidently took the position then that it was just a trend, it wasn't going to last, and there was no need to develop a competitor of their own. Well, guess what? 12 years later, Raptors are still some of the hottest vehicles on the market, selling for way over sticker in incredibly high demand. And everyone else has a competitor. The Toyota Tundra TRD Pro, the Ram TRX, everyone's there except Chevy, who's still sitting on the sidelines in the off-roader truck space, except with their smaller Colorado ZR2. There's no Raptor version of the Silverado after all these years of Ford success, aside from a few trim packages that just aren't the same thing. So I gotta wonder, how many more years of hundreds of thousands of sales of off-roader vehicles does General Motors need to see before they decide to enter this space too? Now, some people are gonna watch this video, some big General Motors defenders, and they're gonna say, well, wait a second, the Blazer wasn't always a big off-roader muscular SUV. SUV? Are you forgetting about the S10 Blazer throughout the 1980s and 1990s? And I concede there is some precedent to a smaller, more compact, less expensive Blazer like this one, but you gotta keep in mind, at one point the Dodge Challenger had a 1.6-liter four-cylinder and it was built in Japan. And when Chrysler brought back the Dodge Challenger at the beginning of the modern muscle car era, that's not the one they chose to revive. Same deal, frankly, with the Bronco. Ford could have given us a new Bronco 2, the little one from the 80s, but instead they brought back the full-sized beast Bronco, the one where everybody's nostalgia is tied up, the one where the market for the old ones is going crazy. And General Motors could have done that here too as well, but instead we got yet another crossover, and General Motors cautiously looking at the off-road market and saying, well, we're not quite sure, I'm not entirely certain, while all of their rivals are dunking over them every single day, selling hundreds of thousands of off-roaders. General Motors comes out with the crossover Blazer and caution about creating an off-roader. Look, there is an off-road version now of the Subaru Outback. That's when you know General Motors has missed a trend, when the Subaru Outback is there before GM. All right, so now I'm gonna drive the new Blazer to answer the question, is there at least a redeemable thing about this car's driving experience? And the answer is, kind of. Let's just say first off that it does not drive anywhere near as cool as a Wrangler or a Bronco or a 4Runner. It doesn't have that burly, tough feel to it. It feels like a car, just like all of Chevy's other crossovers. And in fact, I think that's probably the reason they decided to give the Blazer some of the Camaro design cues. They wanted to make it seem sportier than the other Chevy crossovers and at least give it some distinction from some of the other models in Chevy's lineup. When people walk into a Chevy dealer and ask, what's the difference between this, the Equinox, the Trailblazer, the Trax, the Traverse, at least they can know this is the sporty one. But is it actually the sporty one? The answer is, of course, no. At the end of the day, this is a front-wheel drive crossover. A majority of these are sold with a 230 horse turbo four-cylinder. It's just not sporty. It doesn't drive sporty. It doesn't feel sporty. Now, this particular one has over 300 horsepower from a pretty strong and good V6, and that's nice. It's relatively quick, but just about everything is relatively quick these days. That doesn't make for a sporty vehicle necessarily. And frankly, the engine is kind of the high point of this entire vehicle, which isn't really saying much. The rest of this car is relatively cheap feeling General Motors cost-cutting style interior, which is fine. It's good enough. It's nowhere near as bad as it used to be. And the infotainment system has improved dramatically. It's one of the better ones. It's like fine in here. It really is. This is a fine, acceptable, decent crossover, especially at the price point. It's just not what it could have been. And overall, I mean, ride quality, you feel the bumps. It's not like an incredibly luxurious driving experience, so it's not really intended to be. Acceleration, engine noise you hear, road noise and tire noise you hear. It isn't like a tremendously, it doesn't have any real advantages over its rivals. It's just, to me, it just feels like the revival of a brand to try to capitalize on that brand's success in a vehicle that doesn't really have any of the characteristics that made that brand so successful. It's not really a bad car, it's just disappointing this is how they use the Blazer name. I find it so funny that Ford Mustang fans are up in arms about them using Mustang for the Mach-E. At least that's a fun, exciting performance vehicle that can handle and drive well. This revival of the Blazer is just such a disappointment, such a cynical vehicle. It's fine, it's an okay crossover, and I suspect they brought back the Blazer name knowing that that would help them with sales, with a little familiarity, but it's just a normal old crossover otherwise. And truthfully, there are a lot of options in this segment, and this isn't the one I would choose unless I got a good deal, which is probably how a lot of these are sold, at discounts. Very different from 4Runner, Wrangler, etc., which are in huge demand. They can barely keep up with production. It's just too bad Chevy didn't go that route with the Blazer. And so that's the new Chevy Blazer, another boring crossover. As a crossover, it seems okay, but it could have been better, and sales are nowhere near that of off-roaders like the Jeep Wrangler and Toyota 4Runner, which this could have been. It's such a disappointing waste of the Blazer name. And now I'm going to give the new Blazer a DOUGSCORE. And the Doug score is here, a 45 out of 100. The Chevy Blazer finishes dead last in this group of cars, and with good reason. It has mediocre performance, mediocre styling, a relatively cheap interior, and no real standout features. The Blazer definitely should have been an off-roader, but even as a crossover, it's only okay. And frankly, I'd only recommend buying it if you get a great deal compared to rivals.